Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer on a truly fascinating topic. 57. Contemporary British prose. Short story, novella, and essay analysis. When we think of British lit, our minds almost automatically jump to those massive, sprawling, heavy novels, right? But today, we're completely reframing how we look at short prose. We are absolutely not looking at these shorter forms as somehow failed attempts to write a novel. Not at all. Instead, we're going to explore them as these deliberate, incredibly powerful afterthought genres that writers consciously choose to capture something a giant novel simply can't. To hook us right in, just listen to this brilliant thought from Jorge Luis Borges. He said, "While the novel is expansive, the short story is for all purposes essential." I mean, that perfectly validates our focus today, doesn't it? It emphasizes that these concise formats, the short story, the novella, and the essay, they pack these profound artistic and intellectual punches exactly because they strip away all the fluff. They literally force the writer to distill their message down to its absolute bare essence. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The essential short forms. 2. Anatomy of the short story. 3. The novella's middle ground. 4. The art of the essay. 5. Spotlight, Black Venus. And finally 6. The power of the periphery. Let's get to it. Starting off with Section 1, the essential short forms. Now, when comparing these forms, it's pretty clear that length directly dictates the author's core focus. First up, the short story. Typically coming in under 20,000 words, it is razor-focused on a single moment, an incident, or perception. Key practitioners here include absolute giants like James Joyce and Angela Carter. Then we have the novella, sitting right there in the middle. It's a bit longer, allowing for more expansion than a story, and often takes on these cool, fable-like qualities in contemporary writing, masterfully used by authors like Muriel Spark. Finally, the essay. This is a moderate-length piece of non-fictional prose, centering on personal reflection and single subjects. It's a completely different vehicle, dealing with the real world rather than just the imagination. Moving right along to Section 2, Anatomy of the Short Story. So, how did the short story actually evolve? Well, it's a pretty fascinating timeline. Storytelling itself, of course, has ancient beginnings. Think oral tales and romances designed primarily just to astonish and entertain listeners around a fire. But the modern short story, that is an entirely different beast. We start to see its precursors in the 18th century with the rise of journalism and the Spectator papers. Then, Walter Scott emerges as the first modern practitioner in English, brilliantly blending romance with acute social observation. And finally, the modern short story as we know it today, this highly structured vehicle for deep psychological insight, well, that emerged pretty much simultaneously around the world in the 19th century. Now, geographically speaking, the short story developed at wildly different paces. By 1837, the form was absolutely flourishing as this idiosyncratic national art form over in America. You might be wondering, why? Well, critics actually suggest the thinness of American social texture at the time lacks the complex hierarchy you really need for a sprawling novel, so the brief, poetic tale was just a much better fit. In stark contrast, British writers lagged behind a bit initially. Their cultural life was just so deeply entrenched in the massive, sprawling novel of manners, which frankly delayed the short story's rise to prominence over in Britain. But what actually defines the structure of a modern short story? For that, we've got to look back across the Atlantic to Edgar Allan Poe. He coined this brilliant principle called unity of effect. Poe argued that a short story isn't just a shrunken-down novel. It requires absolute economy of language. Basically, if a writer knows what they're doing, every single incident, every single word must be deliberately fashioned to support a single, preconceived emotional or intellectual impact. Undue brevity is bad, sure, but for Poe, undue length is even worse. And we can actually connect Poe's unity directly to James Joyce's famous concept of the epiphany. Because the short story focuses so intensely on a single incident, it typically culminates in what Joyce called a sudden spiritual manifestation, or a moment of profound insight. It's essentially a psychological snapshot. When that epiphany hits, boom, it entirely transforms the narrative reality, creating a multitude of implications for the reader that extend far, far beyond the brief anecdote printed on the page. Okay. On to Section 3, the novella's middle ground. The novella actually has a really colorful history. It originated way back in medieval Italy with writers like Boccaccio. Then, in the 19th century, it experienced this huge rebirth. But initially, it was mostly in popular sub-literature. Think accessible horror, crime, and romance pulps.
It really wasn't until heavy hitters like Joseph Conrad and Henry James embraced it that the novella was legitimized as serious art. Today, contemporary novellas often show this fascinating escape into fantasy, establishing a kind of fable-like criticism of society. So the crucial point here is that the novella, typically sitting right between 20,000 and 40,000 words, is a highly conscious choice. An author chooses it when they need a form that's more expansive and character-driven than a short story, but way more concentrated than a full novel.
Next up, Section 4, The Art of the Essay. The Encyclopedia Britannica officially defines the essay as a literary composition of moderate length, dealing in an easy, cursory way with a single subject, usually representing the writer's personal experience. Unlike the fictional forms we were just digging into, the essay falls squarely into the non-fictional category. It's totally inspired by real life. Essays uniquely humanize knowledge. They allow the author to really explore their own inner contradictions and act as these powerful tools for self-discovery and rational inquiry.
Now for a really fascinating case study. Section 5, Spotlight on Black Venus. So Angela Carter, who wrote prolifically until her tragic premature death in 1992, is widely considered one of Britain's absolute top contemporary writers. Her prose is just unmistakable. It's profoundly sensual and evocative. But what makes Carter's work so incredibly relevant to our explainer today is her ongoing project of historical recovery. Through her short stories, she actively, fiercely challenged the established literary canon. She deliberately pulled characters straight from the fringes of official chronicles and thrust them directly into the center spotlight. And you can see this brilliantly illustrated in her 1985 story, Black Venus. The story focuses on Jeanne Duval, who was the real-life mistress of the famous French poet Charles Baudelaire. Now, history's official version gives us Baudelaire's highly romanticized poetry, worshipping the silent, alienated goddess. But Carter completely intervenes here. She writes from the perspective of Jeanne Duval herself, presenting this raw historical reality of an illiterate, utterly indifferent woman from the colonies who, get this, actually used Baudelaire's precious manuscripts to light her cigars. Carter uses this sharp, almost shocking contrast to devastatingly attack the Victorian angel of the house trope, finally giving a voice and agency to a historically silenced woman. Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, The Power of the Periphery. It's amazing that through this single, highly concentrated narrative, Carter executes these absolutely massive themes. She explores the concept of the woman as the mysterious other, kind of echoing Freud's notion of woman as the dark country, to critique exactly how Western culture historically treats women as these unknowable opposites. She also totally dismantles the enthronization and goddess worship of women in Western culture. And crucially, she uses the dynamic between the stuffy Victorian-dressed poet and the naked, bejeweled Jeanne as a direct, brilliant metaphor for the power dynamics of colonialism. She highlights the weird, voyeuristic fascination Europeans held for exploited lands. And ultimately, she explores the devastating retaliation of the colonized. And she achieves all of this simply by making a secondary historical character way more compelling than the traditionally important ones. The story itself wraps up with a seriously potent, dark metaphor. Jeanne eventually returns to her birthland and continues to dispense the true Baudelairean syphilis to the most privileged members of the colonial administration. This highly destructive disease serves as a powerful symbol in the text for the physical and cultural retaliation of exploited lands against their colonizers. The text neutrally presents Carter's stark moral through this ending. The enterprise of conquering, whether that means conquering a person in an intimate relationship or conquering a whole nation in imperial expansion, is literally never without unexpected repercussions. And that right there brings us full circle to the true power of short prose. By synthesizing the mechanics of that literary epiphany we talked about with the recovery of marginalized subjects, short stories can entirely reshape our view of reality in just a few thousand words. It's honestly incredible. So I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative question to chew on. If history is written by the victors, whose marginalized story, lingering right now at the very periphery of our official chronicles, could be completely transformed by a single moment of insight today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring, and as always, keep reading between the lines.